Duncan, thank you for coming today to talk to us about your memories of your time as an anaesthetist and also, more importantly, probably about your inventions throughout your career. You told me before that your inventiveness started really when you were still at school. You started making things.
Well, I was always interested in sort of pulling things apart and seeing if I could get them together again, or improving on the design of something. And then I was sent off to boarding school, and the headmaster was a science teacher, and he actually started my interest in science, because until then I'd never had much to do with science.
So when you were at medical school, was that when you first got interested in anaesthetics, or was that after that?
No, it was actually at the end, when I actually qualified, and I was doing my first house job. And I was stuck in the theatre holding retractors, and it seemed to be forever. And the anaesthetists round about were all sort of chattering away and having a whale of a time, and they didn't seem to be particularly sort of fussed about anything. And I was stuck there completely immobilised, having to hold these wretched retractors. And I thought, well, I think I'll be an anaesthetist.
So it was after you came to Australia that you had the idea for the ventilator?
Well, there again, I actually had the idea when I was working in Oldham, and I actually made a valve-controlled ventilator where it was electrical, and obviously I had great misgivings at the time about having anything electrical, because at that time electrical things and operating theatres didn't go together very well because a lot of people were still using ether, which was explosive hazard, and you know, it was preferable to have ventilators which were either pneumatically operated rather than electrically operated. So I abandoned it, and so I didn't do anything else until after I'd been in Australia for a while, and I suddenly heard about fluidics. So I thought, oh, perfect system for operating theatres. Here's something that can be knocked around, banged about. There's nothing, no explosion hazard.
So can you describe the ventilator for us and tell us what its special features were?
Yes, well, the idea was to have a ventilator which was specifically designed for theatre use for anaesthetists, with all the parameters controllable by the anaesthetist, so that in fact you could control pressure, volume, flow and time, all independently, so to speak. So there was nothing on the market that sort of came anywhere near that.
After you'd obviously successfully marketed that, you did make some modifications to the Campbell ventilator, didn't you?
Yes, we had to. As the years went by, there were quite a few modifications. You see, the first one was, we started off and it was hanging bellows, and everybody was saying it's difficult to see that there's a disconnect because the bellows are just hanging there. So they were turned up to be rising bellows. So that was one of the first modifications.
And when did you put a disconnect alarm on it?
The first disconnect alarms were made the same as other disconnect alarms at that time, and they were disconnect alarms that just went on after 20 seconds of disconnect. The alarm sounded. And this was all very well, except there was a switch to switch them off with. And so people that didn't want to have false alarms didn't bother to turn the alarm on. So it sort of defeated the object of the exercise of having an alarm at all. Well, in the various publications and the press around the world, there were increasing numbers of reported cases of disconnects which weren't recognised, and patients suffering morbidity and even mortality from ventilator disconnects. And in the 90s, I suddenly realised that you could solve the problem by turning your thinking upside down, so that instead of having a disconnect alarm which depended upon the pressure after a period of time not reaching a certain pressure, that if you actually had it so that if the pressure dropped below a certain level, the alarm would go off. So this meant that an alarm would go off at the first breath after a disconnect. So it was immediate. The other thing about that disconnect alarm was that it was you couldn't turn it off. That is, as soon as you turned the ventilator on, you had the alarm was there.
So now, of course, it's a standard.
Well, I think it's obligatory to have a disconnect alarm that you can't turn off. And I've never, since that date, I've never seen anything in the literature about any disconnect problems with ventilators with any morbidity.
And the Campbell ventilator, I guess, in the end, was superseded by ventilators that are built into the machines.
Yes, most of the ventilators, they talk about workstations rather than anaesthetic machines almost, and they're all built in. But I'm a bit old-fashioned, and I really love to see bellows going up and down.
Yes. What do you think has driven you in your career to do the things that you have?
I think it's several things. One is knowing that I can make something happen and that it'll actually function well. It's so gratifying to actually get it sort of finalised and actually have it and be able to say, well, I knew I could do it. I knew I could.
Thank you so much for coming along and talking to us especially about all your inventions, which you should be duly very proud of.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, and I've really enjoyed myself. Thank you very much indeed.
Good.